It's the 4th of July weekend, but as America celebrates, many are also wondering what's next for our nation in the midst of this very contentious election year. Certainly a lot of consequential news to talk about this week with our panel. Here with us in studio today, we have former state party chair for the Indiana Democrats, Robin Winston, 2016 vice chair for the Indiana Trump campaign, Tony Samuel, along with two former state lawmakers. For the Democrats, former state rep Terry Austin, and for the Republicans, former state rep Mike Murphy. Mike, I'll start with you. A lot of questions still about what the Democrats will do, what President Biden will do, but also a lot of questions this week about what this Supreme Court ruling on immunity will mean. Some of the dissenting justices saying it could one day make the president a king above the law, in their words. What do you make of this moment that we're in right now?
Well, I paid attention. I'm not a lawyer, but I paid attention to a panel of federal judges. It was on one of the national networks 2 nights ago, and they were fascinating, and they were unanimous in their criticism of the decision. And essentially what we're doing is we're slowly sliding into a South American style government. The Supreme Court normally you count on to protect democracy. It's the last bastion of protection. Instead, they've work against the interest of democracy. I mean, essentially, this may be a little bit of hyperbole, but you could have Putin on the Potomac with a new Donald Trump presidency.
Terry, what's your take on all of this? Not just the Supreme Court ruling, but now this discussion over what Democrats should do. Should they put up President Biden or somebody else? And the stakes now that seem to be in place. Democrats seem to be making the case that this has crystallized the stakes, this Supreme Court ruling this past week. What do you make of all that?
Well, I would say that, it's still, the jury's still out on what the president's decision will be. And, you're hearing people on both sides of the issue, whether he should stay in or step aside. But more importantly, I'm going to agree with Mike. The Supreme Court ruling, quite honestly, was shocking. When I talked to attorneys, when I talked to a couple of prosecutors, they were stunned that it basically removes from their purview the ability to pursue any illegal act, or it makes it much more complicated for them if a president does something that people question whether it was within the scope of his office or not.
What's an official act, what's not?
What's an official act and what is not. So
certainly the pressure that the former president put on Mike Pence is part of that question.
And it's going to tie it up in court.
Tony, what's your different view on this from across the aisle?
Yeah, I disagree. The Supreme Court did exactly what it should have done. It restored the constitutionality of any actions that the president would take. There's a process. If the president breaks the law, there's a process. We've seen it. We've seen it during the Trump administration. They can file an impeachment in the House and try to get a conviction in the Senate. He wasn't convicted, so it's bogus impeachments against Trump. But that's the process. What the Supreme Court did is just restore the way it's been forever before this weaponized Department of Justice brought charges against Trump. As far as what Biden will do, I'll remind everybody that at the end of the year we had predictions for what will happen in the next political year, and I predicted that Biden would not be the candidate. Now something's happened where the national media has shifted against Biden. I said that because he was having these problems before. He wasn't, functioning at the level he needed to, for the last couple of years, and we've seen it.
Robin, I want to get your response to that and also the political side of all of this. One USA Today columnist this week thought that President Biden should turn the page and focus, after his calamitous debate, in their words, on this Supreme Court ruling, and said what better way to interrupt the clamor than to have the court's conservative justices declare that former President Trump might not have broken the laws we saw him break, in their words. What do you make of this notion? Does this ruling sort of crystallize the stakes this year for what's at stake, regardless of who the candidate ends up being?
It makes all the difference in the world on who's going to have the ability to appoint justices to the Supreme Court. They broke 6-3. 3 of these dudes voted for Trump because they were appointed by Trump. And that's not to be anything to be overlooked. Right now, Richard Nixon is laughing. I mean, he violated the law. He would be covered under official acts as being immune from these things.
So what should Democrats do next in the midst of this conversation? That's what so many people are talking about in Washington. And the polls this week certainly have been focused on a number of those questions. This poll from CNN asked, do you think Democrats have a better chance of winning if Joe Biden's the nominee or someone else? As you see here, 56% of Democrats or Democratic-leaning voters think the party would be better off with someone else as opposed to Joe Biden. That number among all voters was 75-25. Meantime, CNN's latest head-to-head poll nationally had Trump 6 points ahead of President Biden, as you see here. But when you look at other alternatives in the party, it's Vice President Harris, who is closely polling the closest to Trump at 47-45. Former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg trailing by 4. Gavin Newsom and Gretchen Whitmer trailing Trump by 5. Mike, what do you make of those numbers?
Well, I think they're good for Pete Buttigieg. He's always had a lot of potential. He's been a little bit quiet as a cabinet officer the last year and a half or so, but he has a chance. He's got the brains and the ability to ramp that up when he needs to. But go back to what the Democrats should be doing. I think the most important polling number that we didn't show here today, probably maybe from a different poll, is that only 27% of the Democrats think that Joe Biden is mentally competent to continue to serve as president.
Terry, this comes as some in the party like James Clyburn say, if it's not the president, that it should be the vice president on the ballot. Do you think that seems to be the momentum where the party's at right now? Where do you think this is headed?
I think that's James Clyburn's position. And there probably are some others that fall in line with that. But this will be a thorough vetting process if President Biden chooses to step aside. And that's still premature at this point.
And that's the big question. We've got to leave it there. We'll have much more with our panel coming up to wrap things up. Up next, we'll hear from former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels about the IEDC, an agency he helped create, and whether the big money projects coming in were worth the investment.